Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of PodSaveChocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to do some random chocolate tastings because May is going to be featuring a whole bunch of interviews with makers and a whole bunch of tastings for the rest of the month. And I want to get it started by going through some of the chocolates that I have on hand, as well as some ingredients for chocolate that I have on hand, to get them as a way to set the stage for what it is that's going to be happening this month. Before we begin, I want to remind everybody that you can go into the comments and let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I don't need to know if you're connecting on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, but you can go into the live chat in YouTube, the comments in LinkedIn and Facebook, and let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I will get that up on screen. And of course, we have questions or comments about anything I might be talking about. You can also get them up on screen, and I'll get them. I try to do my best to answer them. And with that, let's just do a real quick check-in to say that this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go there. You can look at the post for this episode. For every episode of PodSaveChocolate, I put together a dedicated post, right? And it's got the links to watch. Of course, if you're watching, you don't need those links. But if you come back later, there's an archive. You can come back and watch these things, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. And then following that is a sort of run of show. Now, when I published this yesterday, I wasn't entirely sure exactly what it was that I was going to be tasting. And so there are no links to any of the products that I'm going to mention, but I'm going to put links to the websites here after the episode. So you can go pay attention. You don't have to follow on. You don't need to look at any of the URLs. We're just going to go ahead and go straight to the tasting. So let me focus on me because we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that page for the rest of the episode. But I should mention that this episode of PodSaveChocolate, like every episode of PodSaveChocolate, is sponsored by members of the Chocolate Life. And if you go over to thechocolatelife.com, you can click the join button. There's always a free membership. But of course, your financial support, I don't do Patreon, I don't do network advertising. Your financial support makes the channel hum and keeps the lights on and keeps the internet connected and all the things that are necessary to make this happen. And I do appreciate that. So last week, we talked about this past Tuesday, we did the Craft Chocolate Challenge Awards show. And 3 of the chocolates I'm going to taste today were the ones that won the Innovation Awards. So that's going to be one of the highlights of this. But I'm going to jump back a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and talk first about 2 bars that I got at the Salon de Chocolat in New York City at the end of March. And both of the bars are from a company called Ayatica. And I'll put a link to their website, so you don't need to know this. But Ayatica is in Haiti. And what they're doing is they have selected some genetics, and they've planted those genetics in part of their farms in southwestern Haiti. And one of the things they're doing that's I found very, very interesting is they're deliberately blending different genetics of cocoa. So the first bar I'm going to be tasting today is an unflavored bar. It's a 70% chocolate bar. And it is a mixture of Amelinado and Criollo genetics. Now, they don't say what the percentage of Amelinado and Criollo mix is, but it is this deliberate mix. And anybody who has followed me for any length of time knows that I am a huge fan of blending. And so, when I saw this, I'm going, oh my gosh, I think this is a really, really interesting idea. I also want to point out that this little award at the top. So there is an awards program called the AVPA, so the Agence Valorisation du Produit Agricole, or the Agency for the Adding Value to Agricultural Products. And what they do is they hold contests every year, competitions every year, for products that are made in the country that produces the ingredients. So they do an oil competition, they do a tea competition, I believe they do a coffee competition, and they do a chocolate competition. And the requirement is that the cocoa beans that are used to make the product, which is entered in the competition, must be grown in the same country where the maker resides, which I think is a really, really cool idea. There have been a couple episodes where I've talked about the AVPA. What I'll do is I'll link to those episodes in the post for today's so you can get a sense for what that competition is like. If you are a chocolate maker producing at origin, producing in the country, this is a great competition to enter. It is very, very Franco-centric, so it's very, very French in many respects. But you will get a lot of support from the organization because you need to be a member of the organization in order to be able to enter. So you need to become an AVPA member as a condition of entering one of their competitions. So something to consider. But this first one received the silver in the gourmet category in 2024. Now, it's a stand-up box. And it is a BOPP lip and tape. So that's the internal packaging, which makes sense. But I got to say, whatever it is they're doing, this is the back of the bar. Here is the front of the bar. I mean, they're doing it in Haiti, which is not necessarily a country that we think of as being particularly sophisticated. All I can say is, man, I just opened this up and it's sitting here, around belly button level, and I can smell it. It is just really, really odorous in a good way. There is some sort of cacao pulp acidity fermentation sort of on the nose. It has that bright, fresh, fruity on in the nose. The temper is really, really nice. The snap is crisp but forgiving. And on top of the fruit note here, there's also a wonderful, delicate chocolate undertone. Right? So you're getting this bright fruitiness and this delicate chocolate undertone. So if people are not familiar with how to eat chocolate, there are no wrong ways to eat chocolate. There are better ways to think about consuming chocolate if you're going to be thinking about it for evaluation purposes. If anything other than, do I like this or not? But what you're trying to do is trying to get a sensory impression. Because the difference between eating chocolate and tasting chocolate is that when you're tasting chocolate, you're paying attention and you're trying to record, at some point, make a memory of what it is that you are tasting. So what are you smelling? What is your tasting? So aroma and taste together combine into what we think of as flavor of something. And then we're also going to make other associations with what we're doing. So, right. One thing you'll often see people do is they'll take a thumb, they'll rub the thumb on the chocolate. What that will do is it will warm the chocolate up. It will through warming it up, it will increase the rate at which aroma chemicals volatilize and are sensed in the nose, right? And out of the wrapper, the intensity of the cacao pulp flavor aroma is less intense, but I don't know that it's more chocolatey. So I would recommend a multi-stage approach, right? When you're eating chocolate, when you're tasting chocolate. The first one is think about the bite, the chew, and the melt, right? So the bite and the chew are going to give you some clues as to texture as well as temper. And the melt is going to give you another set of clues. right? If on the bite you get something which is quite crunchy or has got a texture to it, that will tell you something about the way it's made, right? Um, that you want to pay attention to. So I would recommend you do those three things. You think about this as a bite and a chew, right? And then once you have the chew, it only has to be 4 or 5 times that you bring the chocolate to the top of the tongue, let it melt, and with a little bit of it, take some of it against the tip of your tongue and rub it against the base of your teeth. And you'll get clues about particle size, right? Are there, is there any texture for what it is that's going on? So let's do that. So I'm going to bite it. And the initial impression I get on the bite is it's what I would expect from the snap and the temper, right? There is a slight give. By the way, it's about 21 degrees centigrade, 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the room where I am right now. To chew, it's beginning to open up. I mean, I kept it in my mouth before I started chewing it so I could talk, and it really would. There's this nice sort of green, bright green, or not. It's not grass. It's not hay. It's not herbaceous, but there's just green freshness as it melts. The chew is very clean, so the particle size on this is really wonderful. I'm pushing it against my tongue, and now I'm letting it fill my mouth. So it's this process of doing it. So I've got this cacao pulp and chocolate on the nose. I've got this sort of green component to it, right? As it clears out of the mouth, sort of the chocolate and the fruitiness sort of beat in and out and in and out, back and forth. But the fat clears cleanly out of the mouth. But it does so fairly slowly. I mean, it is clean, but it is slow. And so the long finish on this is really, really lovely. Right? I'm getting, when we think about a melanado, which is a forastero, what I'm doing is I'm thinking about a variety that originated, we believe, from what is now the state of Pará in Brazil. And it was what was shipped and is grown primarily in West Africa. And so I would expect there to be this wonderful chocolatey note from the chocolate, which I get. I mean, it's done a really good job. Criollos are often grown because, or they're used in chocolate often or the flavors of criollos when they are in chocolate, let me say it that way, are often more delicate and run often to more nuttiness, right, than they do bright fruit and flowers. Although what's interesting is there's not a whole lot of aroma, which is high up in the nose. This is right down in the middle of the mouth through the back of the throat. And by the way, there are taste buds down your throat. So you want to get the chocolate. You want to swallow the chocolate in order to get a full sensory impression of what's going on, of what the flavor is. And we think about, there is this sort of very, very conventional sort of criollo-like the delicate nuttiness, which is the dominant flavor on the long finish for me right now. This is really, really surprising for me. I mean, because I've had many, many chocolates that are produced in Haiti from beans grown in Haiti, and I can't remember a one of them that was as technically well made as this one is, right? And it's got this really, really wonderful combination of these two different genetics. And so if you are a specialty chocolate maker, this is something to consider, right? A lot of industrial chocolates start off with a base of West African cocoa. And then what they will do is they will blend in cocoa from another origin. I mean, Grenada is a very strong example. I mean, Grenada is used as a flavor variety in industrial chocolate blends to make it a little more interesting, even though it is significantly more expensive, or was significantly more expensive than commodity cocoa had been. When cocoa was at $1,500 a ton, or $2,000 a ton, cocoa from Grenada would have been above $4,000 a ton. All bets are off now in terms of that ratio. But this is a way perhaps to stay within a single producing country and get a lot of complexity in your chocolate that you might not get otherwise. Really, really interesting idea. And one of the things that you may not remember, and Georgia, who is connecting, I'm guessing, Georgia Martone, who's connecting from Bologna today, the origin country for Ayatica is Haiti, right? And Haiti is in the island of Hispaniola, and the other half, or the other 2/3 of the island, is the Dominican Republic. And Haiti is French, and Hispaniola is Spanish. But it's really important to remember that in the history of cocoa's migration from the Americas to Europe and Africa by the Spanish, that a lot of the cocoa went to the Dominican Republic. So the ships would leave Ecuador, wherever they were around the Cape, and they would winter over in the island of Hispaniola. They'd restock provisions, but they'd wait for the trade winds to go in the right direction. And so this island of Hispaniola has one of the highest incidence of biodiversity or genetic diversity in cocoa for a country that is not an origin country, right? So we believe that cocoa comes from the upper Amazon River basin, right, on the eastern side of the Andes, between Colombia and modern day Peru. And the closer you get to the center of origin, in many respects, the greater the genetic diversity. And so the genetic diversity component or index on the island of Hispaniola is off the charts. And so I think it's really, really wonderful that Ayatica is doing this work, because I think it should open up the eyes of any specialty chocolate maker, that you don't necessarily need to only go with criollos or trinitarios. What you can do is you can blend genetics, assuming, of course, that you can individually identify the genetics, right? Which is not always the case. But in this particular case, the owner of the farm, what they did is they deliberately planted genetics in different parts of the farm so that they could have this opportunity. And again, I think they're doing a fantastic job in terms of technique. I mean, it's just, the bars are beautiful. So this is the other bar that I'll be tasting today. The temper is fabulous, and there are no blemishes on the front or the back of the bar. I mean, really, really well made. So the second one I'm going to be doing today, again from Ayatica, is another blend of genetics. One of the genetics is a Contamana. And what I may do is I will put the link to Juan Carlos Montemayor team, their 2008 research report on the genetic diversity of cacao, if you want to know where the origin of Contamana is, right? So, prior to 2008, we had Criollo, Forastero, Trinitario, maybe Nacional, depending on how you were going. And now, after the 2008 research study that Montemayor and team did, we realized there are two large structure groups, Criollo and Forastero. And then within the Forastero group, we have sub varieties, right? And then what we're doing is we're hybridizing, either naturally or deliberately, to create, for example, Trinitarios, right? But this is a combination of Contamana, and in Melanado genetics with some guava, right? So, just a little bit of room temperature green tea, which is with a mix of black tea, a little bit of tannins, but not overwhelming, to get some attempt to get the fat off my tongue here. Again, BOPP, lip and tape. By the way, we're now at cottonwood pollen season here in Arizona. There's not a whole lot of cottonwood in New York, and so I find myself a little sensitive to it. There's not a huge upfront aroma on this. It's hard. It's hard to know. There's still a little bit of ferment funk, but in a good way. It's not overpowering. Which if hopefully you're familiar with. Hopefully you've actually been and smelled, a cacao pod being opened and you can smell fresh pulp, and then you get an idea about what fermentation smells like. But again, the bite and the chew are exactly what I would expect from the snap, the temper. The sort of melanado is very, very forward from this. It's not a sort of deep, fudgy baked chocolate, but it's a very, very straightforward chocolate. And the fruitiness on the nose is actually from the guava, which is very, very delicate in this bar. It is there, but it is not overwhelming. But it's just this really, really nice undertone, right? That follows through. And as it clears from your mouth, there's a very, very tiny bit of astringency, but in a very pleasant way. So there are some tannins, and they're not really puckering. They just sort of make themselves present, and they say, "Ooh, pay attention to me." That's called a trigeminal sensation. It's not a taste, the astringency. So it's a sensation like spiciness will be. And it settles down into this wonderful, just straightforward chocolate at the end. It's really nice. I would be really, really fascinated, and I'm hoping I can get Jean-Marcel Jean, who's the founder of the company, to see about chocolate samples like just the Criollo, just the Melanado, just the Contaminant, just the base chocolates, and have an idea about what they taste like on their own, so we can get an idea about what blending them does. But I think, that this is a really, really interesting chocolate. I don't know how widely they're going to be distributed. If you're in Europe, what you may be able to do is go to the AVPA website and ask them about the availability in Europe. I know that here in the United States, there is a distributor who's in Ohio. The company is called Peace on Fifth. And I know that London Co., whom I met at the Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival last November, said that she was going to be importing it here in the United States. And so it should be available from them at some point very, very soon. For me, the highlights of going to a festival like the Salon du Chocolat is meeting up with old friends, which was a it was a good show for that. People I hadn't seen for quite some time, but also finding new things. And when it comes to finding new things, this was one of the things that I found that was really, really new, that I was really, really happy to find. Now, when it comes to that, I am going to be focusing on, for the rest of the month, as I mentioned, I'm going to be doing interviews and tasting episodes. And so this coming Tuesday, which is the 6th of May, I am going to be having a live interview and tasting with Tanya Molina of Via Cuyaya in Ecuador. I've known Tanya for a decade now. She was at the 2015 big chocolate festival in New York City. I believe that's where I first met her in person. But I've got 4 of her bars we're going to be tasting. On Friday, May 9th, I'm going to be doing an interview and tasting with Ali Gower. Perhaps his wife, Freddie will join us, but they're from Chocolate Tree in Scotland. We're going to be tasting their work and going over the history of their evolution. On the Tuesday, May 13th, which is in 2 weeks, I'm going to be streaming a pre-recorded interview with Warren Shu, who is the founder, chief chocolate maker, inspiration honcho for Fu Wan chocolate in Taiwan. I got a couple of really interesting bars. I covered them in the innovation episode because I think he's doing some really, really wonderful stuff. And then the next episode, which is Friday, May 16th, 2 weeks from today, I'm going to be doing an interview and tasting with Neil Ransom of Siamaya chocolate from Thailand. The reason why we're doing recorded interviews is there are 14 and 15-hour time differences, and they're not going to be at their best at 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning to do a live recording. But I'm going to be. These are all. I didn't meet up with Ali Gower of Chocolatry at the Salon du Chocolat, New York, but those other three I did meet up at the salon. I had met Warren in London, like in 2017, I think, at the chocolate festival there. Met Neil for the first time ever at the salon, and then Tanya, as I said, I've known for about a decade, and we're going to be focusing on them. I've got a couple of others, including I'm hoping both Tuta and Juliana Aquino from Baiani in Brazil, and a couple of others going forward. So stay tuned. This list will be updated on every post that I do this month. And so you'll have an opportunity to go and schedule to make sure you're there live or to make sure you capture the archived version. All right. So the next, what I want to do is I want to go through 2 of the 3 bars which won the Innovation Awards for the Craft Chocolate Challenge. Right. And before I do that, I should probably get a little tea in my mouth. So this first bar is from a company called Carabines. They're in Minnesota. Now, one of the things about the Craft Chocolate Challenge is we talk about not just the bar, right, and the chocolate and its technical and flavor aspects, but we also talk about the packaging. And while there are aspects of this packaging that I like, I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful paper. I would think obviously influenced by early Dandelion and early Mast Brothers in terms of the weight and sort of the wallpapery nature of it. But it's not optimal for long-term storage. I mean, once you open it up, it's difficult to get back together, right? And the same thing is true of the foil in the center. Getting this back together and holding it together, unless you finish it immediately, is a real challenge. So what I do want to point out is that this is their POG. So it's their passion fruit, orange, and guava bar. And as we showed on Tuesday, on this past Tuesday in the episode, one of the reasons why we liked it is that it's a swirl bar. So here's the front and the back of the bar. So here's the front and here's the back of the bar. And so what we're doing is we're seeing that you open it up and visually it is quite interesting. So really love that. There are a number of people who've done it. I've seen it. For example, in one of the Mission Chocolate Bar, their Two Rivers bar does something similar to this. And I've seen other swirled bars. This is often a good way to do like a cappuccino bar. So you'll have a dark chocolate, which is coffee flavored, maybe a white chocolate, which is heavy on a cream flavor. And so when you bite them, right, you get the mixture of the two of them. It's a good way to introduce flavors differently. Introduce different flavors in the bar, right? And the other thing is that there is textural stuff on the back of this. And so I believe that this is related to perhaps either dehydrated or candied guava. And so what you've got is that fruitiness on the nose, I think primarily it's the guava on the nose, right? But when the bar feels substantial in the mouth, you get the mixture of the acidity of the passion fruit, right? And then the orange comes in and says, ooh, now I'm orange. The guava is underneath, and then you have this texture associated with the inclusion. And there's a chewiness to it when you get a piece in your mouth, which is really, really lovely. And somewhere there's the addition of some citric acid. And that citric acid just really pumps up the brightness, of the fruit. And this is an amazing bar. If you're looking for, I mean, if you like tropical fruits, right, that you like passion fruit, you like orange, you like guava, and you like chocolate, this is going to be a bar that I can highly recommend to you. And if you're a chocolate maker and you're looking for inspiration, go buy this bar and think about, don't copy it, right? But ask yourself, what is this bar doing and how is it doing it, right? And how would I go about reinterpreting it with perhaps a different set of flavors, right? Really interesting bar. I'm putting stuff on the table behind me when I turn around that I just really highly recommend. It's really fascinating. It doesn't have the longest finish, but the finish that it does have is of the sort of tropical fruit note, and it's a blend of the passion fruit and the orange, right, and the guava. It's not overly sweet, even though part of this appears to be a white chocolate. It's a blend of white chocolate and dark chocolate. It's swirled together. And then it's just keeping on going and going with this tropical fruit. There's aspects of it that are, in the nose, through the back of the mouth, and just, at this point, I really don't want to take the palate cleanser. I really don't want to get rid of that flavor in my mouth. It's just so wonderful, and wonderfully composed. I don't know that I would actually, of these three chocolates, I don't know that I would pair them with anything, right? I wouldn't even try to pair them with a beverage. I want the experience of consuming them. I want to focus on this. So I want it to be a mindful moment, right? I want it to put something in my mouth and just relax and concentrate on the flavors, let it put a smile on my face, just think about the experience of what it is that I'm eating. You pay attention to these bars, and these bars reward your paying attention to them. And I wouldn't want anything that detracts from paying attention to them, right? So I just hope you understand where I'm coming from. Many people think about, again, just eating them, or, what they're trying to do is, all right. So when it comes to evaluating chocolate, right, I think that there are two ways to go about doing it. One of which is descriptive, which is just put something in your mouth and just describe everything you're doing. And to some extent, or everything you're experiencing. And to some extent, that's what I'm doing here. My preference is to contrast two things. So I can say, oh, how are these two things, different from each other? Than to come to an evaluation on which do I prefer. Now, having done hundreds of those things, and I have taste memories, right? When I do my descriptivist kinds of evaluations, I'm not looking to try to extract all of the different possible flavors that I can get out of the chocolate. I'm not trying to describe them. I think that there's sort of a reductivist sense that I'm not really happy doing it. I want to focus on what I think of, well, not what I think of, but I want to focus on the experience of eating the chocolate. And so many of you may have heard Ed Seguin, the recently deceased Ed Seguin, who's just a towering figure in the chocolate world, talk about orchestral. We're talking about thinking about chocolate in the way you'd think about an orchestral piece or a symphonic piece. You have, the drums, the percussion comes in over here, and the woodwinds come over here, and then you've got, the strings coming in down here, and then you think about the crescendo and the decrescendo, and all these different ways of using musical language to talk about the experience of eating chocolate. I simplify that a little bit. There's a concept in electronic music called ADSR, so attack, decay, sustain, release. And so what I think about, what's the initial, right? Is it just going to come in and smack me right in the mouth, my initial impressions, right? And, how does it ramp up, right? And then, when it gets to that peak, how do the flavors decay, right? How does the experience, right, begin to ramp down? And then how does it, right, continue? And then what's the finish on it? And so I tend to think about, I want to describe the experience of eating a chocolate in terms of this ADSR approach, and then think about how the flavors bump in and out. So you may have heard me, previously say, well, the chocolate flavor and the green aroma or the fruit flavor sort of bounced, back and forth. So there is that rhythm associated, which is part of the sustain and the release. So that's the way I like to think about it, rather than focusing on, oh, it went from cherry. Oh, was it dried cherries? Was it Bing cherries? Oh, it went from tropical fruit. Am I able to say, well, is it passion fruit or guava, or what kind of passion fruit it is? All right. So these things can be challenging to do, right? So I find that rather than focusing on what are the specific tastes, right? It's what is the experience I'm having while I'm eating it. And one of the things that I really, really appreciate about all three of the bars that I've done so far is that each of them has a very, very different experience from the time I first smell them, right, from bite and chew them until they leave my mouth, right? And I'm going to encourage you to think about tasting them that way as well, right? To think about the experience of it before you think about, oh, what is my ability to just identify all of the flavors in the chocolate? And I have to say that there are other people who, even with all my experience after 20 years, actually 30 years of doing this, there are people who are much better at that than me, just putting something in their mouth and just describing the flavors, right? A lot of it is because I don't practice that anymore. I don't practice extracting flavors, right, as the primary goal of what it is that I'm looking to do at tasting chocolate. I really want to focus on the experience and what about the experience that I like. Now, having right, there, right, the next chocolate I'm going to taste is another innovation winner. It's the Chocolat Negroni bar. So as Caribbeans was in Minnesota, Chocolat's in Avon, Connecticut, right? And if you're not familiar with a Negroni is a gin cocktail. It often has a bitters, so gin and Campari are two main components in a classic Negroni, and then often orange. Now, orange will often be there in a number of different ways. So I'll take an orange peel and I'll get a very, very thin sliver of the orange peel. What I will do is I'll take the orange peel and I'll wipe it around the rim of the glass. I will then squeeze the orange to get some of the fresh oil on top of the surface of the cocktail, and then I will put the orange into the glass itself. So I have orange, which I'm experiencing in different ways, right, in the context of this gin, and as I say, usually Campari, but I like making one with a Tempus Fugit Gran Classico, which is one of my favorite. I believe it's American-made, domestically made bitters. And orange bitters, as opposed to Campari, which is traditionally a grapefruit bitters, as I recall. And so if we get the Negroni bar, right, the original aroma in here, the primary aroma here has to do with sort of a dehydrated orange peel, right? And I mean, I'm saying that to you now because I know that's what it is, because I've tasted it a couple of times and I've read the ingredients list. And if we look at the back of the bar, the back of the bar has got a lot of stuff on it. And if we look at the ingredients, which I usually don't do before I taste the bar, we've got these cacao beans, cane sugar, cacao nibs infused in a Negroni drink, cacao butter, and orange peel. Right. And so I'm expecting a texture from the nibs. Actually, infusing the nibs in a Negroni cocktail is an interesting way of getting the flavors. You then have to evaporate out the alcohol. And with a bar like this, which has got components in any bar, which has got a different front surface or top surface and a back surface, what I recommend you do is you taste it both ways. Once with the top of the bar on your tongue and the bottom of the bar on your nose, and then turn it over and taste again, because you'll get a very different tasting experience and a different texture experience, depending upon which is on your nose and which is on your tongue. Really, really important to consider when you've got a bar like this. So you know, I think one of the things that I like most about this bar, and it's one thing that I've learned about me and the way that I approach things, is that I am a texture first person, right? I think it's one of the reasons why I like judging inclusions, whether it's a bonbon with inclusions or a bar with inclusions. It's something I'm looking for texture first, right? And this is really, really satisfying from a texture perspective. It is the texture of the nibs on the other side of being infused with the Negroni, in the Negroni. It is the slight chewiness, which is added by the lemon peel, but it's not nearly as obvious as the candied guava. I believe it's candied guava, which is in the Caribbean's POG bar. Again, passion fruit orange guava bar. And it is that complement of texture with the chocolate, which is really, really quite lovely. And again, from an innovation perspective, we thought it was really, really interesting with this bar of going in and saying, oh, it is the combination of, right, infusing the nibs with an actual Negroni, right? Which, if we're not trying to replicate the flavor of Negroni by doing, a gin flavor, so with the botanicals of the gin, and then the orange, right? What we're going to do is we're going to take the classic Negroni of gin and Campari, and one of the great things about making Negronis is the choice of gin is going to have a real huge impact on the flavor. When we were doing Solbesso Negronis, it was just Solbesso and Tempus Future con Classico. It's just an amazing combination. But there is this texture, and then it is a delicately flavored bar. It's not going to overwhelm you in any respect with anything that's going on. So there's really, really delicate flavor. But if you are a fan of a classic Negroni, as I am, what's getting me on the long finish is, what I think of is when I'm smelling a Negroni, which for me made this, oh yeah, this is the right way to go about doing this. I mean, it's a lot of fun. So again, I would not recommend that anybody try to replicate this bar to do a Negroni bar, but I think that it's a really, really interesting approach, right? To take a classic cocktail and imagine how you might get that classic cocktail into a chocolate bar, right? So kudos to the maker there. Now this bar, I have one more from the Craft Chocolate Challenge, but it has spice in it, so I'm not going to taste it. I'm going to taste another one first. And the reason why I'm going to be tasting this one is because it came up. I was thinking about them recently because they're in the chocolate scorecard, and this is Beyond Good, formerly Madagascar, Beyond Good. And I wanted to point out that, this is a really, really simple packaging method. And if you're struggling to find a reasonable packaging method, I would suggest that you go take a look at it. So it is an envelope style. It's just very, very simple envelope style outer wrap, right? With a fold over flap and a bit of adhesive. And inside there is a flow wrapped bar, right? So this is a relatively inexpensive paper. I believe that this is also inks, which are plant-based inks, so they're not using petroleum inks. There are other aspects of, I believe, Forest Stewardship Council paper. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go do this, but it's very, very simple to put together. And so go to your local store, buy one of these bars, and take a look at the packaging and consider it. And then a good quality flow wrap. Good quality flow. Now, by the way, if you're looking for flow wrap film, I may have found a supplier that does a short run digital printing. So that's something to consider. This particular bar, it's in my local Sprouts. I went to my local Sprouts to look at bars, and most of them are owned by companies that I don't want to support. No, I'm not going to buy Lily's because it's owned by Hershey's. I'm not going to buy Hue because they're known by Mondelez. I've tried the Dr. Bronner bar, and it's just way too coconut sugar forward. There are lots of bars in my local Sprouts. They all claim to be good bars, but I just can't support the parents, so I didn't buy any of those. This bar is a 73% cocoa. It is the salted caramel, and the primary aroma on this is the caramel. It says it's made in Uganda, made at the source. So it's grown in Uganda, made at the source. I know that Beyond Good sources in Madagascar, and they have a factory in Madagascar. I don't know specifically about what the manufacturing capabilities are in Uganda, but there are some actually new good factories in Uganda. So they may not own the facility. They're using somebody else's facility to get it done. So this is not a very chocolatey bar, right? It's really about the salted caramel. So the chocolate is a delivery vehicle. So I wouldn't necessarily go to this with a salted caramel saying that I'm looking for a deep, rich chocolate experience. You could hear the crunch of the caramel. So this bar is predominantly sweet. It is the caramel. And even though it says it's a salted caramel, it needs a lot more salt. The salt aspect of this does not come through. And if you're a chocolate maker, even if you're not thinking about, well, number one, if you're a chocolate maker and you're not doing something with salted caramel, you're leaving money on the table. Salted caramel is like the number one flavor for chocolate in the world right now. And so you need to do something with salted caramel. But even if you're not doing something with salted caramel, what you should probably do is play with adding salt to your chocolate. Number one, salt is known to reduce bitterness. Oh, there was just really pop of salt in this particular piece. You want to be very careful. No, you want to make sure that you deliver the salt component evenly. With Beyond Good, it is probably one of the more highly reputable small chocolate makers that's sourcing in producing countries and manufacturing in producing countries. Now, there's another great company from a sourcing perspective, Original Beans. But it's not a big but. The chocolate making for them is done in Switzerland by Veltlin. Now, that's not bad in and of itself. They're fairly open about that relationship. But you need to be careful that, nothing that Original Beans does. They're not a craft chocolate maker. Original Beans is about sourcing the beans, and they produce chocolate from them. And then you also need to be careful about people who are using chocolate, Original Beans chocolate. They're not craft chocolate makers, and they're not craft chocolatiers based on the chocolate that they're using, if they're using Original Beans couverture. So we want to know these things because it does affect the way we talk about them and the way we market things. Now, there's nothing wrong with buying in a couverture from another maker, just being open and transparent that this is what it is you're doing. I mean, I've known Philippe Kaufman, who's the founder of Original Beans. I've known him for a long time, and Veltlin is one of the better, if not the best, family-owned chocolate makers in Europe at the moment at that scale. Bonat is a different beast. They're producing a different chocolate for a different market, and Veltlin is much, 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 much larger than Bonat is. But if you're looking for a well-made Swiss chocolate from a from not Lindt and not one of the big industrial brands out of Switzerland. Velcorin is a place that I would definitely go to. But when we think about, but they're not a craft chocolate maker. They work with specialty chocolate. So and I would think they're more of an industrial maker because they're trying to make couvertures, which are, the flavor is repeatable all the time, right? The texture is repeatable, the rheology is repeatable, the pH is repeatable. And so that's how I classify industrial makers. Right? But if I was thinking about, a choice of Valrhona or Velcorin, I would probably go with Velcorin. My personal feelings about that. And part of it is just the nature of the personal relationship. I have better connections with the family that owns Velcorin. And then Valrhona is owned formerly by the Bone Ground Group, now Group Savencia. So Valrhona is part of a big global multinational. And so we need to be aware of that aspect of the ownership of the company. I think we want to be aware of it when we start making, purchasing decisions. So the next thing, before we get to, the Blind Cat chocolate, Ethiopian, which is the last chocolate we're going to taste today, what I want to do is I want to talk about ingredients. And these are ingredients which were sent to me by a division of Barry Callebaut called Cabos Naturals. And the reason why I have them is because I made some inquiries, about an ingredient that shows up in Blue Stripes cacao bars, which is cacao powder, right? And it turns out that, or cacao shell powder, and it turns out in conversations that I had with the people at Barry Callebaut, is that Callebaut is not providing any of the ingredients to Blue Stripes cacao, which kind of makes sense because the investment in Blue Stripes comes from Hershey. And there's no overlap in the ingredient supply chain with respect to the cacao derivatives, right, that Blue Stripes is using. So I just wanted there. But I was curious about what they called their cacao powder. And the cacao powder, do I have, what did I do? I don't have it. I don't have the little packet here. Oh, yes, I do. It's up here. So the cacao powder sample looks like this, right? And it's called cacao fruit powder, right? And there's no ingredients on this except an allergen statement. And what's interesting about it is I really wanted to know what it was because it's not entirely clear what cacao fruit powder was and the Cabos Naturals cacao fruit powder. It wasn't part of the 2019 launch for Whole Fruit, which I was at in San Francisco in 2019. So I wondered what it was, right? And when you smell it, I mean, it looks like, I'll take a picture of it and I'll put the picture of it in the post. It looks like a clumpy cocoa powder. It looks like it's been alkalized, and it is in fact quite dark brown, right? Right. And the aroma here, if anybody has smelled any of the cacao fruit juice or cacao pulp, including the lyophilized freeze-dried cocoa pulp powder, you'll get the sort of acidic, sour, fresh fermented cocoa pulp smell out of this. And this is one of the reasons why one of two reasons why I don't like using the freeze-dried cocoa pulp powder. One of which, it's often incredibly acidic. The pH of the fresh pulp's around 3.5, and it's got this very, very strong aroma associated with it. So there is this flavor aspect of working with freeze-dried cocoa pulp that makes it difficult for many applications. I found, especially if what you're doing is you're just using it to sweeten a chocolate, right? So I have problems getting past the flavor and the aroma. But the other one is the freeze-dried stuff clumps very easily. It's very hygroscopic. And so if you open up a bag, if you don't put a silica gel packet into it or find some way to use it immediately, it's going to pulp. It's going to clump. I'm sorry, right? And so what this freeze-dried this cacao fruit powder literally is powdered cacao pulp. It's not freeze dried, from what I can tell. There is a patent that Calabout has um, for the production of the cacao fruit powder, which does not include lyophilization or freeze drying. And then what they do is they mix it with cocoa powder. And what the cocoa powder does is it prevents it from clumping. And this has been sitting open, right, on my desk for a couple of hours. Right, I did this just so I could do this. The humidity here, it's not high, it's only about 40%, right? But this is a free-flowing powder, right? And it is sweet, but not overly sweet. It does have the tangy acidity, which I associated with it, which is balanced with the cocoa powder. This would make a great sprinkle it on the back of the bar flavor component. And it could be refined into chocolate to add a particular bit of complexity. You could use it in a baked good. There are all sorts of applications for this, right? How we think about Barry Calabout as a supplier is another question entirely. I'm not going to be talking about that aspect of Cabos Naturals, which is a brand within Barry Calabout. I just wanted to talk about the ingredient itself, right? And what they've done. What this might suggest is that if you do buy some freeze-dried cacao fruit powder, that what you might do is open it up and mix it with cocoa powder immediately, right? It'll be a different texture from this because I think that the freeze-dried powder is refined to be a very, very fine free-flowing powder of uniform distribution, particle size distribution, and this has got some crunchy component to it, which I wouldn't think you've got, which makes it more interesting for many applications. Yeah, I could see lots of interesting things to do. So if you're doing a dessert and you put a chocolate dessert and maybe you have whipped cream or something like that, and you're looking for a crunchy element, put this on top of that. It would be good. This would be an interesting base for doing a chocolate. So if you want to do a spice rub or something like that, using this as a base and then adding spices to it, a traditional Ecuadorian salpiedra, where this is one of the components of it, because there's a sweet sour component in here, which makes it really, really interesting. I think, again, Barry Calabout, but man, if you can get hold of Barry Calabout USA, right? If you got a salesperson, go take a look at the Cabos Naturals and go take a look at their cacao fruit powder. I think there's a lot of interesting things to think about with it. And I know at least one person who is using it as a part of a sweetener combination, right, in a chocolate bar that they're making. So they're using this to mask other sort of sweetener flavors, right? So interesting. The next one, again from Cabos Naturals, this was something that was introduced at the 2019 Whole Foods launch. This is a cacao fruit juice. Now, there are many, many sources for cacao fruit juice these days. The label here, they do not indicate how much of this is juice and how much of this is water, right? And I don't know what the percentage of added water is. Actually, compared with many other juices that I've tasted, it seems like there may be less water in here to stretch it out than others. Where would you use this? This is still a lot of sugar in this juice, but if you wanted to very lightly scent something, right, with this, I mean, it is lower acidity than many others. It is, again, I would not necessarily buy this to drink, but what I would do is I would use it as a flavoring, again, in something very light. If I wanted to, for example, scent a sponge cake, right, and I wanted to put a juice on a sponge cake, this could be very, very interesting. I could add it to a whipped topping. So I want to get a subtle sense for something. This would be a great a great thing to consider in terms of a juice. Again, because it's not as sweet as many as I've seen, and it's not as watered down as a number of other things that I've seen. Another thing you can get is something called a cloudy concentrate. The cloudiness probably comes from the pectin, which is in the fresh pulp, but this is just reduced. It's probably boiled down under vacuum. It has a very different color. So here's the juice, and there's the cloudy concentrate. The juice is cloudy, which is another thing. It's not filtered within an edge of its life. The cloudy concentrate is quite thick and syrupy. And it's much more acidic and sweet at the same time, which is one of the interesting things about pulp. It's sweet and acidic at the same time. I would use this to make a pâte de fouille or something like that, or to flavor a pâte de fouille. Use it if I were to perhaps gellify it with something. I don't know that I would use gelatin particularly, but maybe agar-agar, or maybe you might be able to heat it up with a little bit of cornstarch or something like that, just a cornstarch slurry. Ooh, make a cornstarch slurry with the juice. What you could do is you could pipe this and have it set up really, really nicely. If you didn't really want to make a pâte de fouille, you could use this in a Turkish delight. So add it to, if you were making a flan or creme caramel and wanted to, all right. Yeah, if I was candying tropical fruit, I could add this to intensify the flavor. So again, irrespective of what we think about, Barry Callebaut as a supplier, then I think, it's just, it's really, really nice. And one of the things that you've got from a supplier like this is that it's going to be repeatable. It's going to be the same flavor. If you're working with fresh pulp, then depending on the variety, depending on the season, depending on the time of year, your pulp is going to start changing flavor on you, and you're not going to necessarily want that. And here is some pulp, and you can see it's a very different color. So we got the pulp itself from the concentrate. Wow. And there's almost no acidity in this pulp. It's more like apple than anything that I think of. So I think of a lot of the floral components that I've had it in fresh pulp. This is less interesting. The pulp by itself, it's going to be more expensive than apple. I don't necessarily know that I would go there. It's high in pectin, so would I use it as a thickener or something like that? I don't know the answer to the question, but probably not. It's one way to think about the pulp is if you were to use the pulp, you could then figure out exactly how much water you wanted to add to it. So you could get the juice. You might be able to filter this to remove some of the pectin, some of the fiber that's in here. But if these things made any sense in a price comparative ratio, I would get the pulp, water it down rather than purchasing the juice. But they are both flavorings in interesting kinds of ways. And I'm bringing them up just because I had this interview. I wanted to know what the cacao fruit powder was, and how it differed from cacao fiber, cacao shell fiber, or whatever it is that's in the blue stripes. Ingredients list and who is providing what and where it came from, and they sent me samples, and I have them here, and I wanted to let you know what it is that I thought of them. Again, I'll let you make your own decision about what you think about Barry Callebaut as a supplier, but I'm looking at these three things and I'm going, oh my gosh, right? If I'm looking for flavor stuff, I'm looking to do fun and new and interesting and different things, these are definitely things that I would consider. And the cacao fruit powder, you might be able to replicate part of this by adding cocoa powder to freeze-dried cacao pulp powder, but there is a cooked, crunchy texture to this that you're not going to get. There's a lot of interesting things to think about with that, again, as a textural component, as the basis, which is what I'm going to do with this. Now that I've thought about it, I'm going to use this as a basis of some sort of spice rub that I'm going to use. It would be great on fish. It would be great on fresh tropical fruit, right? So I can think of, like, I would use, I have some tamarind powder. So tamarind and chili pepper, right? And, use that for, dipping fresh fruit in, like a fresh mango. Is a very, very common thing to do. I could see doing that with the cacao fruit powder. A garnish on fish, really, really interesting stuff that I can recommend. I got a comment from Jin Kim. Jim's in Southern California. It's been years since I had cacao juice in a Tetra Pak. A bartender used the juice to make cocktails in craft bars. Absolutely. There was a thought that this was going to be the next big thing. As a matter of fact, in 2019, at the launch of cacao fruit, this concentrate was not cloudy, it was clear. It looked like a thick apple juice. And the idea was that this would be an ingredient in craft cocktail bars. And for one reason or another, it didn't take off. That while people love chocolate, they're having trouble taking a classic cocktail and then using another ingredient in it. That's the problem we had with Sol Beso, right? It was a replacement for gin. It was a replacement for vodka. It was a replacement for silver rum, but we couldn't get anybody to say, I'm going to have a Negroni made with Sol Beso as opposed to gin, right? Or, a classic rum cocktail, silver rum cocktail made with Sol Beso. So even though there are a lot of craft cocktail situations where that innovation is really, really key, and people are doing lots of interesting things, in many ways, it is also very, very conservative, as we found out with the Sol Beso thing. All right. So I got one more thing I want to do. We're running a little long. Right. But I tend to get talking. Giorgia Martone from Bologna says they are both interesting. Absolutely. I think they're both interesting. If you can get your hands on samples and think about how you might use them, I think there's real value. So the last thing I want to do is this Blind Cat Ethiopian Spice. It is a 72% dark chocolate. I don't know that the origin of the beans is here. One thing to do is be very careful about misspelling on your labels. The ingredients here are cocoa, butter, cane sugar. The Ethiopian Spice blend includes, for some reason, New Mexican chilies, onion, garlic, turmeric, cumin, ginger, salt, cardamom, nutmeg, black pepper, fenugreek, allspice, and cloves. All right. So interesting. I'm just like really, really broad, not incredibly spicy because the New Mexico chilies are not incredibly spicy. But I mean, I am also a fan of the idea of this kind of packaging. I think there are things that could be done to improve it. But there is a tab here which fits into a slot, and the bar slides into, let me see if I can do this, slides into that, which protects it. So there's printing on here. There's unused space. We could use that space a little bit more. But otherwise, I think it's just a really, really nice idea. And it's a good way to, the BOPP lip and tape bag is not too small. And if I want to, I can put it back into this and I can go close it up. And oh my gosh, right? Think about usability, guys, when you're designing your packaging. You want to be able to make it usable. And the only reason why it poofs up is because I've got this sitting on top of each other. I got pieces in two layers. But right, what you get when you smell this is the bases of the Ethiopian spice. The under that is the chocolate. I mean, so there's some chocolate, but you're getting the spice layer on top of it. It's well tempered, it's well crafted. Bite and chew. The first thing you're getting is chocolate, a little bit sweet. But then the spice blend comes in, And the chocolate flavor itself is more complex, right? Right. There are some fruity floral aspects to some of the spices that are in here, right? Like the fenugreek and the allspice. Um, and then there's a complexity, the number of different elements in the spice blend. And then the heat comes through at the very end. Well, it starts to build, but as the flavor of it is doing the decay and the sustain, the chili aspect of it, the heat of it comes through. It's all in the center of the mouth, above the tongue, in the back of the throat, which is sort of typical of New Mexican chilies. But there is this heat component of it. There's a bright floral aspect to it as well from the spice blends, as well as from the peppers. New Mexican chilies are that way, right? But you've got the chocolate all the way through it, right? Where it's right there, and it just lingers. It goes on and on and on and on. It's just really, really, it's very well made. Temper is great. The texture is great. The mold is interesting. The bar is really well put together. You are supporting an animal rescue, cat rescue organizations when you purchase this, and it's really, really, really a well-crafted bar of chocolate. And I recommend that you go and take a look at it and see what they're doing, because I think you will be pleasantly surprised, and you're supporting a maker out of Montana. So we talked about a Montana maker, a Minnesota maker, a Connecticut maker. Those are three. In the United States, we got a maker from Haiti, Ayatika, as well as we've got a much larger scale brand in Beyond Good. And with that, we're at the end of the episode. We did run a little long. I do want to point out that this is the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. If you're not a member, you can go and click on the green button up here where it says account. You can join, always a free membership. If you do have the resources to help support the work that I'm doing, either a small amount monthly or a larger amount where you can get some consulting hours associated with it, coaching hours, happy to help with any of the topics that we've discussed today: formulation, flavor, ways of reducing product costs, ways of talking about the product that you're making. Happy to do all of those things. And with that, I think we're done, except to point out again before we leave that for the rest of this month, we're going to be focusing primarily on more tastings. So I've got 4 episodes scheduled. So the next 4 weeks, the next Tuesday, next Friday, the following Tuesday, and the following Friday, we are going to be doing tasting episodes. We got 4 great makers, and I hope you'll join me because you'll get a chance to hear from them. We'll be learning what motivates them, what their background is, what inspires them, the challenges that they're facing, all of those kinds of things, in addition to doing a live interactive tasting of their chocolate. And that's it for today. That's it for today for me. I hope everybody has a great weekend. And I want to end, as I always do, by reminding everyone, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, maybe you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everyone, ciao.